Good afternoon, dear friends. Welcome to Ukraine Media Center. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here.
Is of importance to Ukrainian businesses. So I was attending a meeting last week, and one of the producers said that it's a key matter for them. It was an issue of a matter of their competitiveness with imports, because as long as you can import a full UAV or complete UAV, or even if you manufacture a component for UAV, or if you produce the raw materials for a UAV, you end up as a UAV manufacturer. But as long as you manufacture like wings or rotors, you are involved in this industry, and thus you cannot export any of your goods. So the regulations is where the Ukrainian military industry is lost. So now we're inviting you to this journey to the tax orchards of military industry. And Ms. Yuliia, now the floor is yours. Okay, now let's proceed to the presentation. I would like to say a couple of words about the Council of Business Ombudsman. For some of you, it's a known institution. For others, it may be new. And probably I can say something new even for those who have been knowing us for some time. We were established back in 2014 based on the memorandum entered into between the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine and the European Bank for Reconstruction of Development and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and 5 big business associations, including European Business and Commerce Chamber, Ukrainian Union of Manufacturers and Producers, Trade and Commerce Chamber of Ukraine, and Federation of Ukrainian Employers. So, talking about our focus, our main focus is to consider the complaints of the businesses for the local governments and central government. But also we have another area we focus on, which is the analysis of systemic issues and providing suggestions to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine on resolution of such issues. And today's survey is the product of such work, of such an analytical project. And here are the top 5 reports categories coming from the business. So the tax issues are on the top level. Traditionally, they account for more than a half of all of the complaints, which yet another time explains why are we dealing with this issue, because we have expertise in this field. Coming next is the issues with the law enforcement. Third is the issues with the state regulators. Fourth, the customs. And the last is issues with the local governments. And now let's give the floor to Ms. Maryna, those who were directly involved in the study. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And now proceeding directly to the essence of our study. It was covering 3 issues that we were able to identify as we were communicating with the businesses in this sector. And the first one is about course for localization of the production. The President of Ukraine reiterated that Ukraine has to be sovereign, and it needs to be sovereign in terms of its defense production, so that everything that can be produced in Ukraine could be produced in Ukraine, and it would provide us with the security guarantees in a sense, and would make our economy stronger. And in this relation, we've heard statements from the businesses that don't fall in line with this localization course, because as it turned out, manufacturing of the components for the defense industry is not always profitable in Ukraine comparing with importing them from abroad. What do we mean by that? That's the first block of our study about the way that this tax exemption works. But let me make a small remark. The VAT exemption can be treated in a number of ways from the perspective of the buyer and the seller. So for businesses, the exemptions are not always good news, because the VAT is paid by the final consumer, and the businesses, they have to administer it, and thus they transform the costs for procurement of goods into the tax loan that negates the effect further on. And when it comes to this situation, how it works on our end, generally we have a number of types of exemptions for defense industry goods. And we have serious exemptions for import of the raw materials, but they cover the manufacturers of the ready-made goods like electronic countermeasures, demining machines, and something else. There's a short list with the most popular articles in it. And basically this import of materials and raw materials is falling under the exemption, just like some of the components. They have exemptions for import for the needs of the industry sector. There's a long list, but we all understand that it's needed by the troop. But when it comes to the manufacturing of some specific components, this market is underdeveloped because the absence of exemptions for import and VAT, it's more profitable to bring the components from abroad, and we understand that, for example, we're giving the example with the wind, but it may be any other component like a battery. A battery may be manufactured for UAVs, but it may also be manufactured for, say, bikes or TVs or everything that requires batteries. And it's not only the story with the accumulators. Many components fall under this category, and this potential for manufacture things in Ukraine and to have the money spent for it to be turned around in Ukraine. Currently, this discussion is only just starting, or it has started long ago, but it hasn't gained any logical continuation, because in the end of the last year, yet another serious step towards the localization was made, because previously those materials for manufacturing of industry goods, it was pretty limited. It was limited to 5 or 10 positions, and now this list is like 50 or even more articles on it. So now we see the state moving towards the intensification of the exemptions regime for this industry, and it's all happening within the framework of the localization course towards localization. So what we're having now, for example, let's take a UAV win. A producer may import China manufactured components or other foreign-made components under the exemption, and a drone manufacturer may be manufacturing this win having imported the materials for it, but a potential producer of a win or existing one, they cannot use the same exemptions as they import the goods and materials, and thus they become less competitive, as well as their products in terms of price, let alone the cash gaps, because the exemptions are used one way or another if we sell it to the security and defense forces. But one way or another, eventually we're seeing that due to increased financial burden on the manufacturer of the components, we see that the situation becomes problematic. And it's not only about the global losses to the budget, but it's about reorienting from imports that doesn't impede any potential cooperation with the allies. But we have to study the ministries that can develop this market. So basically, what I've described now, the key recommendation of this block is to balance the exemptions for the producers of potential components too, and the control and reporting mechanisms should not be invented. They already exist for the manufacturers of the equipment. And now, when it comes to the use of imported goods, there is quarterly reporting that can be extrapolated to the situation with the components. Now let's proceed to block number 2. This block is somehow consequential from the first one, but it's more about the application of rights, because from different sources during our meetings and in the complaints that we review, where we had a number of individual and collective meetings in Kyiv and Lviv, where we heard about the problem that the exemption mechanism is used unequally by all, and it applies both to the to those who order the works under the contracts. They already account VAT in their prices, and now it comes to the local governments who used to have bigger budgets. Now they have smaller budgets, but still they order some goods from the manufacturers for the needs of the security and defense sector. And in this case, some may use the exemption, some may not use, because for someone it's less beneficial and profitable. Some may have paid the products, haven't paid the import VAT as long as it was not falling under the exemption, but then the code of the product was included in the list, and thus the tax credit should to be adjusted, adding more tax liability on the manufacturer. And in case of importer, there is no this lag, but still they can agree to the conditions provided by the ordering party. And after the order is made, the electronic countermeasures system or a UAV is being supplied to the security and defense sector. After being paid, then after a period, the supplier is getting a prosecutor from the economic court requiring him to repay the VAT that was paid by the ordering party represented by the local government. And the sense is that if we take a look at who pays what to whom, we have to understand that after the supplier was paid for their products and then they paid to the budget, certain amount of those funds that after the adjustment of tax credit was credited as the expenses of the supplier, and then certain fraction of it we've counted, it accounts for 15%. Well, the supplier is required to pay another amount equal to that they've already paid to the budget. So basically they are required to return to the local government what was already paid to the budget. And we understand that those are different budgets, like central and local budget, but still the supplier is the one who suffers. And we're seeing that there are now cases initiated against the suppliers. We've heard those complaints from the businesses, and we've realized that it's worth paying attention to, because there might be different things arising, such as neglect. For example, there are, for example, criminal cases related to the neglect of the representatives of the local government, but again, it affects the suppliers as well, certain segment of them. So here we're basing our suggestions on the fact that those things need to be explained. We actually suggest the tax advice for this, but basically what needs to be done is we have to arrange an information campaign about the application of exemptions, because in the trilateral agreement there is no requirement to add this regulation about who's the, or the provision about who's the final consumer. But if we take a look at those cases, it's not done to a number of reasons. They mix this notion of the final consumer manufacturer, or final consumer, which is in the sphere of the tax exemptions, and that was something that was made up just recently. So again, it's about the contractor and co-contractor under the government contract again. So the businesses have different opinions on whether that provision is set forth well or not. Is it set forth properly? But the matter is that there is a lot of space for further explanation, and we have to take an analytical approach at what codes should be added at what time into this exemption list. And we have to understand that as we talk about the imports, certain goods have already been imported with VAT included, and basically it's not about the defense industry only. When something comes at exemption after it was already imported, that's no good news for the importers. But one way or another, as this list of the exemption codes is expanding, this tendency of having the articles added to this list, I mean, they are being added, but we still understand that they may disappear from that list. That's a minor problem, like that the producers have just pay VAT and that's it. But in this case, the suppliers have to plan what to do to avoid those losses, and they need to plan how to react when they want to take part in that procurement, in the bid, when and it has already VAT included. Well, they want to avoid this situation when the authorities take away what was already paid, because again, it accounts for another 15% of the transaction amount for them. And for the third block, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Vladyslav, who will tell you in detail about this block of our study. Thank you for giving the floor to me. I would like to tell you about the repairs and modernization. Why are we paying attention to it today? Because importing the material is now done without VAT, and the maintenance and modernization services are being subject to VAT. They were not exempted from VAT. Unfortunately, we were reported about this problem by the businesses, by the repair workshops. Why is it important for them? Because the VAT increases the cost of the unit of repair for 20%. So in fact, talking in simple words, when say a factory pays 20% for 5 units of material, they just pay yet another, the cost of 1 unit additionally. And unfortunately, that VAT that they're paying, they don't pay in favor of the they pay it in favor of the military unit, and that VAT is not being reimbursed from the budget because it's been paid in favor of a non-VAT payer. If you pay attention to this chart in the slide, there is a VAT running in a vicious circle. So the government allocates 1 million hryvnia for repairs of material. They announce a bid. Manufacturing enterprise provides the service. then the cost of service includes VAT that is getting back to the budget and is being distributed in such a vicious circle. So it's a closed cycle of VAT circulation. Why is this problem important in our opinion? The repair companies are saying that the material that is being handed over after the repairs, no, it's not new, first of all, and then the number of components is being removed from that material. The material is being damaged in the battlefield. It requires repair and maintenance all the time. So in our opinion, this closed cycle of VAT doesn't help in the repair and maintenance of material, and we suggest to focus on the fact that the funds allocated for the repairs should not be paid as VAT. They should be channeled directly at the maintenance and repairs. What's important to mention, in this cycle, for this million of hryvnias, we don't repair 2 howitzers, let's say, or other pieces of material, but only 1, because those 20% are being added, and they don't fit the price. They don't fit. So on top of this being a vicious circle, it reduces the capabilities of the companies to repair the material. And talking about this situation, how the tax code regulates it, first of all, the Article 195 of the tax code has been in the tax code for long, and it regulates the matter of supplies of the components for the supply of components for the peacekeeping operations. This standard was not contemplated for solution of this type of tax that we're facing now. So it's not only about the repair services, it only describes the supply of components. Yet another provision that was adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers under resolution number 178, it identifies, it says forth that the supplies in favor of the security and defense sector of components such as batteries, tires, as well as POL. So those are all the things that don't only that not help to maintain or repair personnel, but rather they help to keep it in the mode of normal operations. And as we were explained, if the service of repairs is being provided at zero cost, if it's included in the cost of service, it's all being taxed with VAT. So unfortunately, there is a malign fiscal practice that is arising here. What are the suggested steps? First of all, we would like to emphasize that we understand how important is it during the martial law to ensure that tax proceedings to the budget, and we don't suggest any steps that would result in reduction of such proceeds. But what we want is to have the state to pay attention to it, because in this cycle they act as both an ordering party and as a buyer, and probably we need to analyze the payment of VAT by the repairers to understand what are the amounts we're discussing here. Also, we have to make a decision to make sure that the funds allocated from our taxes are channeled for the maintenance and repairs of material, but rather than for redistribution to the budget. So in our summary, we've provided a number of suggestions, such as zero rate for final supplier of the repair services or special VAT regime, for example. We think that search for this solution is a part to a more broad discussion, and we urge all of the key stakeholders to familiarize themselves with our summary to find some ways to resolve the existing problems. We are happy to have a discussion with you, and in case you have any problems, any questions, I'm sorry, I'm happy to answer any and all of them. Okay, so the first part is said about the imposition of the tax regime for the manufacturers of the components for the purposes of our defense and security sector. And when we talk about tax exemptions here, it's about reduction of the tax proceeds to our budget. So is there understanding about what part are exactly we're talking about? Will it really result in the reduction of tax proceeds? Well, it definitely will result in such reduction in the short-term perspective, but if we imagine that defense industry as something that has its needs, there's definitely someone who wants to satisfy those needs. And as I was saying, for example, our imports are falling under exemptions, and we suggest to apply those exemptions to the local manufacturers as well. And our expectation is that it should pull some part of the manufacturing to the local market. But to formulate it properly, well, there are available resources on part of the involved ministries, and it's more of an economic view at the situation. I'm not even sure that it's possible to be counted because the defense market is pretty dynamic. And even when it comes to the capabilities of our manufacturers, they can stay idle, and this is when they start talking about exports. But one way or another, we expect that there will be no much losses in the medium and long-term perspective, but rather the consumer will reorient from the exempt import to the local production. So now it's cheaper to import, but why don't we do that? It would be cheaper to manufacture components in Ukraine to keep money within Ukrainian economy. Okay, some might take a look at that example you were given in one of the slides, and they may come to a conclusion that the government may stimulate the full cycle companies. Why isn't it so? Yes, it is so. It's clear that, first of all, those are the type of companies that needs to be stimulated, but we understand that not all of the manufacturers are ready to set up the full cycle, because even those who are involved in assembly of the components, they are supposed to take those components from somewhere. Just like we're seeing in the first column, they may be importing a component because it's cheaper without tax burden and customs burden, and they can also import the raw materials under exemption. So they have choice here, but there is certain segment that is, and again, it's quite logical, it's been emphasized publicly, Mr. Roman has mentioned it, that the producers are saying that there is a market ready to manufacture components. And due to the existing situation, this market is now being rendered incompetitive. And the state, yes, it stimulates the manufacturers of the ready-made products because those are the products can go directly to the front line. But again, for those producers to expand their capabilities so it reflects positively in our economy, I think they're not going to mind it, at least for what we know. Thank you very much for your answers, dear friends. If you have any questions, you have opportunity to ask them. raise your hands and get the microphone. And I would like also to ask you about the complaints. We know that it's your basic function. You're getting complaints from the businesses. You respond to them. You take steps to improve the business environment. So again, talking about the numbers, what is the overall dynamics so that we understand what is the need of the business to report to you and what are the problems that they cannot solve by themselves. So are you asking about the total numbers in Ukraine or in this sector? Well, we can discuss both the sector and the overall situation, and I would like to find out what's the dynamics. Well, basically the dynamic remains either stable or its reduction. The nature of complaints is changing. Specifically when it comes to tax complaints, it changes from easy and painful issues in the VAT system, like registration of tax invoices, to tax inspections that are being made for the periods within 7 years. So for the inspectors, my colleagues can comment it. When it comes to the tax invoices, you have to read just a couple of pages. So in cases of a tax inspection, it may be hundreds of pages of a difficult, complicated documents. So with the end of moratorium and when the inspectors are going on a hunt, the number of complaints is growing. The number of them may be smaller, but the complexity of them is growing still. We have to invest more time. They take more time to get familiarized with. And I would like to mention that there is openness of the current state tax inspection to sit with us, with businesses, to discuss how can we rationalize those things, because they're seeing that having opened that floodgate, it starts flowing and we have to do things in a rational manner. Well, that's wonderful. This is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, the further steps. So now your study is done. You've come up with the suggestions. So what do you plan to have the changes happen on the level of the state? So are you having the proper communication with the state, between the state and the Council of the Business Ombudsman? And are you seeing the readiness on the part of the government? Well, generally, we had previous discussions with some stakeholders. For example, it was interesting for us to understand what is the vision of the situation on part of the Ministry of Strategic Industry. I can say that they're remarkably open and they are ready to move into the direction of solution of those problems. We will develop this discussion, and then we are about to discuss those things with other stakeholders, including Ministry of Finance. That's clear, because they get involved in all of those matters. So there is still a lot of things that are subject to discussion and about which we would like to provide our opinion, and then to start moving towards implementation of those recommendations. Because, for example, when it comes to the third item, the zero interest rate, it's a creative story because it doesn't apply to any services, but it applies for the goods of international import, and there are some exemptions for the goods purpose for security and defense sector. And after having analyzed those exemptions, we understand that there is a space for implementation of some similar things over there. So we market that those are the problems that are of of concern to the business, and we suggest to move forward with those matters in the branch associations and businesses and the ministries. What I would only like to add that we already had a meeting with the key stakeholders to discuss this survey with the number of ministries, with the branch associations. So we got the ball rolling, and now it's only one of the steps on our path of advocacy of those matters. Well, I would like to thank you for the great job you're doing with your study. Thank you very much. Hopefully, we're all interested in having our military and defense industry growing, and I would like to thank our security and defense forces who render events like this to be possible. Thank you very much, and glory to Ukraine.